I'm Courtney Bird. I'm with the committee for a Falmouth Community Network. And to my left is Peter Cook, who is also on that committee. Peter is the IT director for the Falmouth Public Library. And in his prior life, he was a professor of computer science at Temple University outside of Philadelphia.
Correct.
And there, incidentally, are two other members of that committee who are not here, but I'll mention them anyway. David Eisenberg from Woods Hole, who was formerly an advisor to the FCC on national broadband policy during the Obama administration. And Art Gaylord, who is a retired IT director at Woods Hole Oceanographic, and also one of the founders of Open Cape, which is a nonprofit middle mile broadband network that covers all of Falmouth, covers all of Cape Cod and southeastern Mass. To my right is Christopher Mitchell of the Institute for Local Self-Reliance. And he is our guest today. He is the director within that institute, the director of Community Broadband Network Initiative. And his work in that area focuses on telecommunications, helping communities ensure that networks upon which they depend are accountable to the community. He's a leading national expert on community broadband networks and speaks at conferences across the United States on the subject, and occasionally to directly debate opponents of public ownership of broadband networks. He was honored as one of the 2012 top 25 in the public sector technology by Government Technology, which honors the top doers, drivers, and dreamers in the nation each year. That same year, the National Association of Telecommunications Officers and Advisors named ILSR Broadband Organization of the Year. On a day-to-day basis, Chris runs the muninetworks.org, which is a comprehensive online clearinghouse of information about community broadband networks throughout the country. So we're excited to have you here. So what we're going to do in this program is to talk first about what it is that is happening here in Falmouth with a community broadband network. And then Chris will help us put all of that in a national context. So the first question that comes to mind is why a community-run fiber optic network in Falmouth? And it's clear to many, many people that the major telecommunications companies, Comcast, Verizon, are not necessarily serving our population and the town as well as it should. And in fact, their model is to obviously make a profit for their shareholders. And they've already invested heavily in their infrastructure, which is primarily copper-based, either phone lines or coaxial cable, which is what cable operates with. However, for them to upgrade, there isn't an incentive at this point because there's no competition. There's no incentive for them to upgrade to fiber optic cable. Fiber optic cable, without going into details on it, fiber optic cable is infinitely faster, much more reliable, and has unlimited capabilities and can be upgraded without having to replace the fiber optic networks that or cables that already been laid down. So a Falmouth community network would become a vehicle for economic growth. It has been shown in communities which have established public networks that there's economic growth, there's a diversifying of the economy, and so on. And so this is an investment in infrastructure similar to what this country did 100 years or more ago when they invested in electricity. And the electricity experiment, the electrification of America, originally it was done primarily for lighting. But once that electricity was run, people began to say, well, what else can we do with it? And so we have all the things that you can possibly imagine, from the sublime to the ridiculous, from vacuum cleaners to toasters to electric stoves to TV to all kinds of things that weren't even imagined when the first electrical networks were laid down. And that's what the promise is of something like an investment in a fiber optic broadband. So it's a vehicle for economic growth. It's a vehicle for improving the life of the community. Having fast internet, having high-speed broadband is far more than being able to download your favorite movie very quickly. It has to do with the potential to deliver health care, as is done in a number of communities, including Stockholm and Sweden. It is a vehicle for education. It helps to facilitate the public services that are supplied by our community, whether it's police or fire protection or emergency services. All of those can be enhanced by a fiber optic network. The electric company can benefit from it because they can use fiber to monitor their system and be able to fix outages much more quickly. So it's a very important investment in our future, and that's what the goal of our committee is, to convince the town that this is a good thing to do. So one of the things that we have, we're very blessed with, is a nonprofit fiber optic, what's called middle mile network, called Open Cape, which covers all of southeastern Massachusetts. It covers Cape Cod, and it's here in Falmouth. It connects the library. It connects the municipal buildings, the police, the fire. It's connected to Falmouth Hospital. It's connected to the scientific institutions in Woods Hole. And right now, Open Cape is working with the Falmouth EDIC, that is the Economic and Industrial Development Corporation, which is a nonprofit, to bring high-speed fiber connections to Main Street Falmouth businesses. So what we want to do is to take what Open Cape has done, and our committee is trying to convince the town that we take what Open Cape has done and we run the last mile. That is, that we build out a fiber network that connects Open Cape to every single house and business in Falmouth. Falmouth has a year-round population of over 32,000. In the summer, it grows to over 100,000. There are 450 miles of roads in the town. There are well north of 22,000 either single-family homes, multifamily homes, condominiums, businesses of one sort or another. 22,000 of those who could be connected to this and would benefit from it. So, can we have the next slide? So, what has happened? What has happened so far? Well, this committee was formed not so long ago, in March, and it kind of started because I went to a joint meeting of selectmen and planning board and conservation and a few other town boards last January or February, and made the mistake of getting up there and saying we really need, we need to invest in our future, and we need to have a community-run broadband network. And after the meeting, several people came up to me and asked how they could help. And then I went to the Falmouth Enterprise and got them on board with the concept. And very soon, people contacted me out of the blue and said, you know, how can we help? And from that came the committee that we now are working with, which, as I mentioned before, consists of David Eisenberg and Art Gaylord and Peter and myself. And so we started sending out emails and contacting people and creating a website and so forth, and we organized a public meeting in the Falmouth Town Library on June the 4th. We had no idea what kind of a response we'd get. Well, I think we would have been thrilled if we'd had 30 people show up. Well, we had close to 100 people show up, and that included members of the select board. They included the town manager. They included a number of people who were interested in the issue in town. And we had a 90-minute meeting, and very few people left early, which indicates the degree of interest. And we had a presentation about what fiber optic was and is, and about the potential for a community network. We had a guest speaker, and about a 45-minute Q&A. And at the end of that, it was very clear that there was the next step was to not talk about something in a theoretical sense, but to have contract for a feasibility study. A feasibility study would identify, number one, is there really an interest and a need for this in Falmouth? And it would identify what the funding sources were, and we'll have more on this later. But it was, we had gotten some estimates that it was going to take 6 months and probably cost somewhere in the neighborhood of $50,000 to get it. So of course the first question was, where's the money going to come from? I can tell you that our ad hoc committee certainly didn't have $50,000 that we could throw into the ring. So we thought, well, there are two possibilities. One is to go to town meeting in the fall and ask town meeting to appropriate $50,000 for this study. The other thought was maybe we could get this done sooner, and the town has the EDIC, which is the Economic Industrial Development Corporation, a nonprofit whose goal, whose mission is to further the economic development of the town of Falmouth. Certainly a study on a major infrastructure improvement such as this was right up their alley. And we were fortunate at that point that on our committee was Brooks Bartlett, who was also on the board of directors of the EDIC. So he was all excited after our meeting with the turnout, and a week later, the EDIC's monthly board meeting was held, and Brooks made a motion that they should put up $50,000 and conduct this feasibility study, and it passed unanimously. So that wasn't bad timing. 1 week we have a public meeting, the next week we've got a $50,000 feasibility study. I mean, you know, some towns and some communities that takes a year or more just to do. So we were off and running and pretty excited. And personally, of course, I get overexcited about everything. And so I had visions that pretty soon, by the end of the summer, the guy would be coming down the street connecting my house to fiber. But it doesn't quite work that way. So the next step after this meeting then was to get the feasibility study approved. So next slide. So the timeline that we developed and we're in the middle of right now is the first step was that a RFP, which is a request for proposal, was issued by the EDIC in July. And there was a deadline set for the bidders to submit their proposals by the 12th of August. We were very lucky to get a total of nine bidders, and all of them are very interesting proposals, and we are now in the process of evaluating those proposals, conducting follow-up interviews where appropriate, And the goal is to select a firm to actually conduct the feasibility study by, I have mid-September, but we're looking more toward the end of September, beginning of October. Now, the study is envisioned to take approximately 6 months, with a report to be issued in the middle of March. Now, at that point, all the stakeholders will now evaluate what this feasibility study has proposed. What are the options they're suggesting, the costs, and all of that. So the stakeholders, which we envision to be the Board of Selectmen, key members of the town government, the EDIC, and other interested parties, will now sit down and try to come up with something concrete that they can take to town meeting for a discussion and approval, we hope. And fortunately, we have Peter, who is not only on our committee and all the other things that I said he's done, but he's also a town meeting member. So we hope we have an inside track here. So what I'd like to do is turn this discussion over to Peter, and he can talk about what it is that we're hoping to get answered by this feasibility study. We need the next slide so that.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Courtney. I've been asked actually what a feasibility study is, and I've been learning as I go too. One of the things, it'll do many things. It'll get a overall assessment, and they spend 6 months getting an overall assessment of the needs, whether people want it, what it will take to create it, what the network will look like. And so go to number 1, it says assess Falmouth's needs and interests, including residential, business needs, impact of seasonal population, and that includes the tricky bit because we're a population of full-time folks and renters and also people who own second homes here in Falmouth. And that is trying to figure out how does that all work in the mix of who will buy into it based on those different areas. Another one we thought about too, which is important, which is the recent FCC ruling regarding community networks and how they're funded and what percentage they get from the fees that commercial providers give them. And FCTV here has that issue. How much will that percentage be the same, increase, decrease with the new ruling? And how can a community network that we have, how can we benefit that? How can we contribute something to that to be part of it so that people watching can watch FCTV through a future Falmouth community network? The other thing the feasibility study will do is it's going to look at Falmouth versus towns with networks for models, because we're not the only one, not the first one to do this. As I understand it, there's probably about 800 some, or again, Chris, you can tell us what the number is. There's a lot of them out there who have done this before us. We're not the first to step into this. So we're want to look at other similar towns. I mean, it might be hard to find one that's a vacation area on a coastal community, but maybe we can find something that close that resembles us through the feasibility study. And there's also challenges for Falmouth existing providers, the big one being Comcast, and also Verizon, environmental, legal, all kinds of other challenges that we don't know, that we'll see when it comes in the feasibility study. And also, one of the interesting things I find as being a tech person is what are the recommended network technologies? What are they going to suggest? I mean, you can say fiber, which a lot of people don't know what that is. It's a glass strand with light pulses through it. They're used to Wi-Fi in their house. Can you have a combination of that? Could you have a neighborhood Wi-Fi? Could you have a direct connection with fiber to a home or other way of delivering the network? And then you have to go into provide cost analysis of network designs. How much is going to cost? How much, is this realistic? Then you have to look into the funding options. Is it coming from local funding, state funding, federal funding, combination thereof, private funding, donations? What is it going to be? And how have other communities, created that sort of thing? And then we're going to look for options for who's going to run the network. Is it going to be the town, a nonprofit? Is it going to be some combination thereof to do that? and what kind of services are going to offer. Folks at home who are using Comcast and similar DirecTV, they're used to having TV and their phone and their internet and other things through that. And then you have another population who are cutting the cord and going streaming. They're using just having internet connection, they can get everything through it, and they can use a streaming device. And the last in the feasibility study is figuring, of course, a pro forma analysis for the first 10 years of operation. What will it cost? What will be projected income and expenses? And when will it pay for itself down the road? You want to know that. You don't want to be investing in something that's never going to pay for itself and lose money all along the way. So we can go to the next slide. So we asked what's next, and after the feasibility study and even during it, we're developing a marketing strategy to figure out to promote the NEVA community network. We're looking at all the different populations, whether it be general, business, seasonal, school, civic organizations, all town government officials, elected and appointed town meeting members. We want to make sure that we connect with everybody and explain what this is, because in general conversations I've had actually recently, people have said to me, so your network's going to replace Comcast? That's not the truth. This is something run next to it as an option. As I describe it, this is an alternative. You have a choice. Right now, we really don't have a choice in this town as to who's going to be the provider. And this is giving you a choice. It's not telling you who you're going to go to. It's just providing a choice and showing you the options. And along the way, we actually have created a advisory committee of folks that are very interested. Some of them came out of that meeting on June 4th. And we've been meeting with them, starting to meet with them and saying, let's figure out who can be the advocates for this. So that's where we are right now. We'll have the feasibility study underway, like Courtney said, at the end of September, October, and we'll see where we can go from there. And we have next slide. Give a plug for ourselves, for those at home. If you go to our website, falmouthnet.org, you can actually register yourself on our mailing list, and we've been trying to create a semi-regular notification of what we're doing and things that are happening for us. So make sure you go to falmouthnet.org, register for our mailing list, and we'll keep in touch that way. And if you have more than an interest of just following us and you want to get involved, let us know. So
I think that's where we are in Falmouth. And so I want to turn to you now, Chris. You've been sitting over here soaking all this in and getting an education along with the audience out there. So I thought we'd turn to you, Peter, to throw a few questions at Chris. And what we're looking to do is to, put what we're trying to get underway here in Falmouth within the context of a national, what's going on nationally. Because, we're very fortunate that we're not alone. We're not the first ones. We may not do things exactly as others have done it, but we're going to have the benefit of that experience. And that's huge, because presumably that experience of others will help us to do a better job with whatever it is that we create. So I'll just turn this over to you.
Sure. So Chris, here we are at our beginning where we are. We're just on the verge of creating a feasibility study and picking who's going to do it and get that underway, and then waiting 6 months for a result. Can you talk to us about some of the challenges groups like ours face at this stage?
Yes, there are multiple challenges that you have to look forward to. One of the things that I would think is, to start with, would be that I wouldn't consider the 6-month period where you're waiting for the feasibility study to be completed as a time for vacation. It's a time for community meetings, for making sure people are learning more about what's going on. I think one of the biggest challenges that you'll have is making sure that a majority of people in Falmouth have a sense of why this is important, what's in it for them, and why they should be enthusiastic about it. Because for those of us who recognize the benefits of community networks, providing competition, a new level of investment, it's kind of obvious as to what the benefits are. But for people who don't deal with this on a daily basis, they're going to have a lot of questions, some of which you've already outlined.
Thank you. Yeah, this is all new territory for a town that's never had a community network.
Well, if I could just jump in, I mean,
sure.
what's interesting, I think, is that this is an investment unlike we've seen in a long time. Generations ahead of me, I don't want to presume what anyone else's ages are, but they, built water systems, electric systems, road systems, rail systems, and it's been a while since we really had a new major infrastructure approach, and I think we're out of practice as to how we go about it.
Well, and a lot of people assume that sort of like this is a luxury to have internet service, but right now it's a need like any other utility. That is.
Absolutely, it's hard to raise children and have them get a proper education that makes them competitive with kids that have high quality internet access if they don't have that. It has a major impact on real estate values, aging in place, which is a major issue for the entire Cape, I think, to make sure that people are able to stay in their homes longer.
Absolutely. Working at the library, I see people who coming in there who can't afford to have a high-speed network access. They may get a low-speed one, but they can't afford the upper tiers to do, so they come to the library for that free internet, which we certainly appreciate them visiting the library all the time. But there is a need because I see people using it for nursing exams, looking to get a job, looking to do all that. And fortunately, we have a town where that's all available, but to have that in the home for your family, not just yourself, you can really benefit from it.
Yes, and there's a myriad of other benefits as well from the fact that everyone will pay less if you move forward because of competition in the market. The fact that the community solution will keep more of the dollars in the community because of local people working on it and the shareholders effectively being here in the community. There's all manner of benefits that we could spend hours talking about.
Oh, absolutely.
But I think what you're touching on is, and we feel the same way, that we're not going to sit back over the next 6 months and not reach out to the community. Hopefully this will be the first of many TV shows that we're going to do, all with a goal toward educating people from things just as simple as what is fiber. I mean, one of my friends, who I respect mightily, he runs his own machine shop up in the Falmouth Tech Park, and everything that he's got in there, he's got millions of dollars invested in everything computerized, and he turns out widgets for the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution that are machined to tolerances we can't even imagine, because the things that he turns out, one of a kind, end up going 8,000 or 9,000 feet deep in the water, and they have to work. So, he and I are good friends. So I've been telling him about all of this over a couple of beers at Liam McGuire's, and he goes, "So fiber, isn't that something I take so I become more regular?" And I go, "Well, not really." But my point about that is, and I think he was pulling my chain, but the fact is that part of our education is what is fiber optic cable, and why is that better than what we have? And I have people tell me they have great service and they have 80 megabit service from Comcast or something like that, and they're satisfied with it. And I said, well, now if you had like Fort Collins, it's just opened up a gigabyte upload and download speed for $60 a month. So if you think about what that means, if you had a 2-hour Blu-ray movie, in HD, you could download that in a matter of 5 seconds.
Yeah, absolutely.
And and what does that mean? It goes to what you're talking about, Chris. Falmouth and the Cape has a large retirement population, including yours truly. I'm 79 years old. So when you speak to the issue of trying to age in place, the fact that the potential for fiber optic network that connects me in the home and allows me to stay in that home longer. Connects me to my doctor, to the hospital, to emergency services, such as, again, if I understand, you probably know better than I believe Stockholm, for example, has a dedicated fiber that goes into every home, and it connects the home with the police, with the fire, with the emergency services, with the hospital, and your doctor, and you can actually have virtual doctor's visits.
Have you seen that, Chris, in other communities where they use it for more than just the internet connection?
Absolutely. We see it major public safety implications. We see it in terms of economic development is one of the key reasons it's been built. But increasingly, we're seeing it with schools. I believe it's Columbus, Mississippi, is looking at making sure that because they own fiber to different parts of town, they haven't gone citywide, but they have fiber to discrete parts of town. They're setting it up so that kids that have devices issued by the schools will be able to take those devices to these places. They just automatically hook into the wireless and they can use it there.
Wow.
It's the first step in terms of trying to figure out how to use their assets. They've actually not been allowed to go citywide because of the state, which under severe pressure from Comcast won't let them build a citywide network in that case.
Well, that was something I was reading in your bio, was that interests me, which is you directly addressing it, how you put it, directly addressing the opposition
Sure.
to that. And what do you have any examples of what that's like? What, for example, this thing comes to be, Falmouth Community Network comes to be, and I have every expectation that those who are competing, Comcast, Verizon, all that, will notice and they'll want to try to compete and try to dissuade people from joining a community network.
That's right. Comcast has certainly opposed these in the past. They have a variety of reasons for doing that. And I don't want to sit here and say that they're evil, because I don't believe that they're evil. I think Comcast has a legitimate interest in wanting to slow down competition, and they work well at that. Other cable companies have engaged in those same tactics as well. So this is not something that's unique to Comcast. I would not expect Verizon really to get involved as much in opposing it. Different cable and telephone companies actually act differently in different areas. Charter Spectrum, which doesn't have much of a presence here, they're vicious in North Carolina, but they're more reasonable in some other states. So there's a lot of different things that one might expect, but you would certainly expect Comcast to be highlighting situations in which municipalities have built these networks and it either hasn't worked out well, or someone has said it hasn't worked out well. And this is where we really get into my background, I think, more, which is cases in which municipalities have built networks that are very successful, but they've been slandered by academics or think tanks that are handsomely paid by the cable and telephone companies to suggest that a number of these networks are not succeeding. So I like to be clear about this.
Yeah.
Some cities have made mistakes. Some cities have had really severe challenges. Some of them have found ways of working around them and fixing it. But others are just accused of that, and they haven't had those. And
well, that actually was one of my questions, which was, what are some of the rookie mistakes and stumbles that you've seen in initiatives for community networks?
Well, I think one thing to be very upfront about is that most municipal networks have been built by cities that have an electric department. Now, you all on the committee are well aware of this, and from what I can tell, everyone that I've talked to here that's enthusiastic about this project understands that it's a unique challenge for a city that does not have a municipal electric plant to move forward with this.
Right.
There are cities that have done it. They've often relied on partnerships, or just had to educate themselves more, or make sure that they're bringing the right people to town to work on this system. But making sure that they're aware that that is a unique challenge. I think the number one thing that has gotten municipalities in trouble, whether or not that's led to financial problems or not, let's define in trouble as not necessarily meeting all of their goals, is marketing. It's something that cities, public entities aren't well versed in. But if you are going to go into competition with Comcast, even if you're going to do that indirectly in some way, you have to have a plan for the lower prices that you can expect Comcast to offer. You can expect that if the city moves forward with a network, Comcast will respond with more promotional offers. And you have to have a plan as a city to respond to that and to adjust that over time, because Comcast will probably have weekly meetings in order to adjust their strategies. And if a city is having quarterly or biannual meetings to adjust their strategies, they're not nimble enough.
I see. Yep, that's a very good point. You have to be competing on the same plane as they are in the same way.
And one thing to keep in mind as well is that Comcast offers a very good product. Some neighborhoods may have less reliability than others. And I understand that's true both here, it's true in St. Paul, Minnesota, where I live. But the fact is that as far as the cable companies go, Comcast runs a very good network.
Yeah.
And so while other cities may have competed against lesser, non-premium brands, let's say, you will be competing against a company that has certainly a negative reputation in terms of their services and their prices, perhaps, but on the whole, they offer. I'm a Comcast customer myself, and I see them in their upgrades, and I think there's a lot of need for competition and choice, but it's not to say that Comcast is running a bad network.
So, if you can describe the viewers, because there's a number of people the same way. I'm a Comcast subscriber too for my internet. But what are the differences, what are the benefits to going to a community network instead of a commercial one? And again, we're not telling people you have to choose a community network when it arrives. You have a choice. You can stay with Comcast, you can go to a community network.
You could be a trader if you want.
Yeah. What are the advantages to a community network?
I think one of the best advantages, and it actually isn't the technology of the fiber optics so much, it's transparency. In that, you look at a lot of municipal networks, they don't engage in these games in which you don't know what you're going to be paying in 6 months. And so one of the biggest advantages is if Falmouth runs it in the way that most municipal networks are run, you'll have a price, and whatever's advertised is what you will pay each month.
I see.
And you're not going to have hidden fees. You're not going to not understand your bill, probably. Another advantage that's unrelated to the technology is that you would likely have local service technicians much more rapidly responding to problems as they developed. You'd have fewer problems because the nature of a network that you would build with the fiber optics is much less complicated. There's fewer areas for problems. There's less single points of failure. So you'd probably have fewer problems, but when they arose, you'd probably get better help faster.
Well, that's something Courtney or our committee has been talking about, of keeping it local.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Right, there's actually a great quote, and I think that any place that has regional accents will appreciate this, but the mayor of a town down south would say, when you pick up your phone if something's gone wrong, or if you just want to change your service plan or something like that, you're going to talk to someone who speaks Alabamian. Right? You're not even talking about going to the Philippines. We're talking about you're not going to call someone in South Carolina.
Sure.
You're going to get someone from the town.
Yeah,
Right.
Exactly. And I think that's one of the things that we've talked about is a local support, and also the money goes back into the community.
Mm-hmm.
That's what you've talked about.
Right, and I mean, I think it's interesting your observation about that the pricing of the services you offer has to be competitive with Comcast, but it's been suggested to some that you'll never beat Comcast at the price reduction game.
Not if they want to fight you on it. I mean, this is true of any kind of investment in which you have network effects, which is to say, you pay a lot of money up front to build the infrastructure. Once it's built, your marginal costs, your costs of keeping it running are quite low. So for a company that's already amortized or paid off the cost of its network, Comcast could turn around and offer the service for free. They could take the profits they make from their monopoly markets and subsidize service here and just offer it for free. Now, Attorney General would probably look into that, so we won't expect that, but we will see the prices from Comcast drop, and if they want to, they could absolutely make sure that they are charging a lower price than you are. And so what you have to do is make sure that you're engaging on quality rather than just price.
Correct. Yeah.
Which then goes to the services you offer. I think most people look at, the Comcast model, which is triple play, either voice, TV, and internet. And the question is do municipal networks feel obliged that they have to compete on those three things, or can they be successful without, for example, offering TV?
Well, the question of offering TV, I think, has gone from yes or no to how.
Yeah.
And I say that as
Yeah.
someone who has experimented with a lot of the services that have replaced the cable lineup. So 2 years ago, a city like Longmont, Colorado, that was building a network and not offering cable television would tell people, well, you can stream certain things like Netflix, but if you want live sports, you're gonna have to get satellite or Comcast or something like that.
Right.
But now we have all these packages. We have YouTube TV, which
Yeah.
is something that I've tried along with many other packages. I follow my regional sports, so you can follow New England Sports Network on there. And it's actually really nice in that case because you can just say record all of the Red Sox games and
Right.
and they're all in the DVR. You don't have to remember anything else. So I would say that you probably would not offer what we call a linear cable package, which is where Falmouth would spend more than $1 million to build a building that would receive signals from space to turn them into the cable channels and have a clicker. You'd probably be encouraging people to use a service like
A streaming
Hulu,
service, yeah.
like
Right.
like a Hulu, which has the live sports and everything
Yeah.
else.
Well, I've actually, for myself, I've been streaming for the last 6 years.
Okay.
I do not get cable TV in our house. And as time has progressed, we certainly have all the options of YouTube TV. I can also, which will actually give me both the national channels as well as the local, meaning Boston channels. And in some cases, there are other community, I've seen on streaming that there are some community TV networks have taken advantage of that and created apps. I use the Roku device to get it into the house. And it's been very successful. And even just, even not using that, by using streaming from websites, I've seen, for example, I want to see the parade, or actually the countdown of New Year's. Well, I can go to the NBC website or whatever website of who's ever broadcasting it and actually do a streaming straight to my TV.
Right.
And actually see that right from my phone directly to the TV set. So it's, reading the articles, people have been doing more cord cutting, and it seems to be more generational. That's my general opinion of it. The younger you go, the more likely that's the case, because people are watching everything on every device they have.
Yeah, 6 years ago when you started, I think it was beyond the range of many non-technical people
Yeah.
to be able to manage that. And now I look at different setups, and you might have a remote that has 4 buttons on it. Anyone can learn how to use that very easily to
Right.
navigate these menus and to use the Roku system or something like that.
Or
it's quite friendly.
or Apple's or Amazon's or any of the others.
So what it leads to is that the design of the network has got to have sufficiently fast speeds. And this goes back to, when you design it, make it easy to go to a gigabyte or better.
Right. Well, I mean, even coming online in November, Disney is bringing their app out, and they're offering 4 simultaneous streams for the low price, whatever they're charging, and they're offering in HD, full quality. They're trying to beat Netflix.
Right, 4K.
Yeah, 4K. That's right. And but to get that into your house, you can say you're going to get it, but if you don't have the right wiring or the right conduit to get to your home, you're not going to see it in the quality that they're advertising necessarily.
I think that one of the things to keep in mind for the higher quality is that the difference will be not so much, I think, for TV streams, but really an employee of Woods Hole Oceanographic Institute.
Right.
Being able to, which I would assume you would build your network in a way that would interconnect with Woods Hole, which is already on OpenCape. And so you'd be able to basically be in your office from your home. And that's a major difference from a Comcast network, where you're likely to be having to go all over the eastern seaboard potentially with that electronic signal
Right.
before it gets back to Woods Hole again. And so you can do these things which will make a big difference for a small number of people, but there's a lot of different applications like that for different people.
Such as, what would you, what
Well, so
application?
Woods Hole would be one. Another thing would be anyone who's like a photographer or any kind of artistic type person, which does a lot of digital media, does really fast upload speeds. That's something Comcast won't have for many years.
Right.
In 2023, 2024, I think we'll see Comcast, bringing that to a market like Falmouth,
Right.
but where they have a very fast upload speed. Right now, it's a pretty slow one, even for their top packages.
Well, that's from the technical side, that's something for viewers to understand too, is that when we throw around words like gigabyte and megabyte that they are probably familiar with, when they look at the speeds, there's the advertised speed of, say, for example, maybe like 100 meg download to you, and then the upload speed is short, smaller going upload, which does matter if you're sending stuff somewhere.
Absolutely. So a lot of people are probably on the order of 100 megs down and 5 up, maybe 10 up if they're on a higher tier.
Right. And
so going to 100 or 1,000 megabits up means that you can upload things to clients, to Dropbox, to Google Drive, to any of those kinds of services immediately. I actually do run a company doing sports photography, and being able to have a robust upload would make it much more secure for me, in that right now I have a safety deposit box in which I keep hard drives.
Right.
I'd rather store everything in the cloud, but with my upload connection, it's not very feasible for me to do that. And so, that's just photographers today, but increasingly we see other differences as well. And one of those is data caps. As someone who uses my connection a lot, or if you have a family that has multiple kids who do a lot of streaming, we're starting to see people come into hitting data caps, which is where a cable company like Comcast says there's a certain amount you can use per month, and if you exceed that, you have to pay more. There's no rational reason for doing that except for the fact they can, and they want to charge extra money to people who use it a lot. We don't see data caps on hardly any municipal networks.
Well, that's the other thing that for folks at home, they realize when they're buying subscribing to Comcast, they're paying at different levels, and they're going at different levels. And in our house, we had to go to an upper level because my wife has her business at home, and we have streaming and all that, so we had to do that. But we're paying a much higher price than the entry level one. The other thing I find interesting too is that most people, some have done it, but most people have not, is done an actual speed test for their internet connection. It may be advertised as 100 meg, but the reality is you're probably getting like 76 or a lower speed. It's not a true speed, which in a community network you would probably have more true speed to say this is what you're getting and this is what you're paying for it.
That's our experience. At the same time, I think it's worth defending Comcast in that I think they do tend to be better than many other companies at meeting what they're advertising. The DSL companies in particular tend to be much worse about that. So I feel like there's...
Well, that's the limitation with DSL.
It is a limitation. But it's also an issue with over-advertising what the DSL is capable of.
Yeah.
But I tend to be conservative. I try to be conservative in what I'm saying about a company like Comcast because it's important, I think, not to give them any opportunity to claim that we're exaggerating their flaws.
Absolutely.
I think any of these big monopoly companies have enough flaws for us to focus on them and even downplay them, but still make the point.
Well, that's a good lesson for us in creating a community network, is to stick to our message, and if we're going to quote the opposition or whoever, we are accurate.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, now one of the things that goes through my mind is that we're having this discussion, particularly about, upload and download speeds and advertised speeds versus real speeds. Doesn't a lot of that go to, and this is where my technology is more limited, and that's why I'm a generalist and you're an expert. But the model that I think both DSL and Comcast use is that they send their signals out to a node, and I'm using that, or a hub that services a neighborhood, and then there might be 100 homes connected to that hub. So if only one person happens to be on that hub, downloading or uploading or doing anything, the speeds are liable to be pretty close to what's advertised. But if everybody on that hub gets on and starts downloading things or uploading things, that network's going to slow down because it's getting choked. It's just more data than its capacity can handle. Am I correct?
That's right, yeah. I would say there's more bottlenecks in the cable network than we would find in the fiber system.
How does that work? I mean, what's the difference between the coax cable, the electrical wiring cable, versus the fiber optic? What makes the difference between a bottleneck and not a bottleneck?
There's a lot more, you can think there's a lot more spectrum to play with in the fiber optic cable than there is in the coaxial system. And the coaxial system is limited in large part by a lot of the legacy decisions Comcast had made. In order to, I mentioned they're going to be doing upgrades in several years. In order to do that, they have to replace a lot of the network, a lot of the devices that are expecting certain things to happen on certain frequency ranges. And in order to free up more space, they'll need to change that around. And they'll be doing that, and their network is going to get better over time.
Sure.
We're actually benefiting right now from the previous round of upgrades they've gone through, in which right now, I don't think we'll see many bottlenecks, but as you get more 4K TVs, as you have, on rainy days when you have 100,000 people living here, if people start using it
That's what happens
out.
in the summer.
Exactly. I mean, I would expect that you would see that you'll start to see those bottlenecks develop.
Right.
Now, the nice thing about a fiber network is you could still certainly get those bottlenecks depending on how the network is architected.
Well, that's what I was getting to, yeah.
But you can fix it, right? I mean, like that's the decision for the town to make at that point.
Right.
Right now you can't call Comcast and say, hey, how about if we, do some upgrades on your network and get some
Right.
better speeds because we have these key businesses that are having challenges. Comcast, isn't set up to respond and doesn't have the same incentives to respond as the city of Falmouth does. Now, there's a local network in a city called Mount Vernon, north of Seattle, and they drew several employers out of Seattle to go to this smaller town north of Seattle.
Okay.
And they asked one of the employers, what's the big deal? You have this municipal network here. And he said, well, one of the things that's different is that if something goes wrong, I walk out of my business, I walk 2 blocks down to the city hall, I go in there and I say, hey, what's going on? And I can get an answer. And not only that, the mayor knows that he can do that. And so they have incentives that are very much different from what you see from a company headquartered in New York, Dallas, Philadelphia.
Sure. Well, one of the things we've been also talking about is who's going to run this network. And have you seen municipal ones or private nonprofits running the networks? Are there any advantages or disadvantages to those situations?
I think there's always trade-offs in these different decisions. Mostly there's been municipal networks that are run by the municipality. There are some cases in which the municipality builds a network and then leases that to one or more independent service providers. There's also situations in which there may be a nonprofit involved. Some of these arrangements fall into a range of things we call public-private partnerships, which is a term of art. I think it's important to recognize that public-private partnerships may be something that makes sense where you have an entity like OpenCape that can take on some of that, a trusted local provider, or just an entity that has some roots nearby. Or a for-profit business, that may be a good trusted provider. It's important not to view a public-private partnership as just some means of lowering risk. I don't think that they historically have necessarily lowered risk. It can change the risk profile, but if things go bad, it can actually be more risky if you're not making all the decisions yourself.
I see.
And so there's a range of models I would expect you to be considering, and one of the things that you'll have to be deciding is, can we pull someone in that will have the right set of skills to want to live here and run the network for a long period of time? A lot of people want to live here. So I think that just geographically, you have an advantage of getting the right talent here to be able to do it yourself. But that's not the sole decision as to whether that makes sense to run it yourself or not.
Right.
No, I'm still back on the network architecture. If you have a fiber optic network that's purely fiber optic, and you design it with the same sort of hub, are you not going to run into the same kind of problems of slowing down with use?
So the technical people in your audience may be wanting me to get into really the details of different network architectures and technologies, but I'll just note that that anything that you do as you run into bottlenecks with fiber optics, you will be able to upgrade it faster than we would expect demand to rise. So you will want what we call headroom, which is to say, like, if you have a pipe and you fill it half up, that's when you want to start doing your upgrades to make sure that the pipe is never more than half full. And with fiber optics, those kinds of upgrades are relatively inexpensive. You don't run into the same kinds of legacy problems that a Comcast has or any cable company has in terms of upgrading the plant technically.
Because you just upgrade the stuff at either end.
Well, and then the network is smarter in some ways and less, it's more programmable. So you don't have as many pieces of gear that are unable to adapt to the new technologies.
Right.
And one of the things that we experience here with storms too, I was going to bring this up, but we just experienced it with the tornadoes that landed on the Cape in the summer, is what is one network more durable, say a coax electrical system versus a fiber optic system? Is it more durable, or are they just as vulnerable to disasters and storms?
I think fiber optics would be more durable, but there's a number of different variables. The key thing to keep in mind is that the way that Falmouth would build a network is almost inherently going to be more durable than the way a private company would. Because as you're building the network, you have to make decisions about, are we going to invest more money to guard against low probability, high impact events? And a private company is going to say, probably we're going to do less of that because we're focused on those short-term returns.
I see.
I think Falmouth, first of all, you already have the Open Cape, which has done a lot of redundancy as far as I understand it.
Sure.
And so you're probably going to continue to build in that way to make sure that you have multiple routes to public safety institutions and things like that.
Right. And it's true about any network, is that there's no perfect design that's going to withstand everything, but you want to at least have something as flexible and at least redundant as possible in order for possible disasters.
And a lot of the network is more passive, which is to say that in the Midwest, where we have a lot of flooding, we've seen networks go underwater for months, weeks, certainly, and they continue to operate because there's no electricity running through the wires or anything like that, no amplifiers there. And so you have a lot more flexibility.
Okay. So I think, do you want to maybe wrap this up?
I guess when I saw the guy over there with the hook saying we had 5 minutes.
I can come back. I have more to say.
Well, we would certainly love to interview you again and talk to you again in the future as we go along. Maybe bring you back after we've gone through the study and we've seen some results.
And we know that I believe you've contacted Sue Moran in the past.
Yes.
And she, back when I was first getting my feet wet with this, even before we set up this committee, she forwarded an email from you.
Okay.
'Cause you said you were going to be in the area, and then she said, we really ought to set up a meeting with Chris. And so at the time, I thought that's interesting, and all of a sudden, here you are.
Twist my arm, bring me back to the Cape.
Yeah, well, it's a nice place to visit, and it's a nice place to live. And it's not as, the weather isn't as nasty in the wintertime as it is out in Minnesota.
I think you meant lovely.
Yeah, but it's great hearing your perspective, because we're new to this, and we don't want to make mistakes that other people made. We want to learn from them, and we could go on for hours, I'm sure, going through all of the possibilities that and all of your experiences that you could fill us in on. What I would like to leave with is there's one community out in Idaho, in Ammon, and this model has been touted as a tremendous way of building out a network. And I wondered if you could just fill us in a little bit or comment on it from your knowledge.
Yeah, we actually made a video about Ammon, Idaho, which is right next to Idaho Falls, called The Virtual End of Cable Monopolies, that I think would offer a deeper explanation. But in short, it's a model of people who are enthusiastic about the network helping to pay for the costs by either writing a check for their install costs or by attaching it to their mortgage with an assessment of some form that would allow them to pay it down over time. And it's a very promising approach that we see others experimenting with, and I think we're going to see more before you have to make any hard decisions that you'll be able to learn from in terms of this alternate approach to funding the network.
Well, thanks, Chris. And for the viewers at home, make sure you go to falmouthnet.org and sign up for our newsletter.
Yep, and thank you for sitting in and watching, and hopefully it won't be too long. We'll have a reality here of a community-owned broadband network. Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Peter.
Thank you.
Thank you.